Perestroika. Is Trump the West Gorbachev? Reformations can be made more deadly than revolutions by Morgoth. I have the link to this article in the description. His primary thesis is that Gorbachev's attempt at reform unintentionally destroyed a shaky system. And if that's true, might not Trump, as a reformer, destroy our system as well? I see two flaws with this analysis. First is the assumption that Gorbachev's reforms caused the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's a questionable cause and effect. The Soviet Union was dealing with a bunch of different issues by the time Gorbachev showed up. First, the transition away from Stalin through several different leaders essentially killed much of the revolutionary fervor in the minds of the citizenry. Under Stalin, the Russians knew that things sucked, but they assumed on some level Stalin kind of knew what he was doing and was bringing them to the point of some form of perfect socialism. With each new leader, they got a new variation of, well, the last guy was doing something horribly wrong, and now I'm going to fix it. Each iteration of this would bring hope to the people who were not fervent about socialism. However, the die-hard believers' foundations were shaken each time this happened. So, by the time Gorbachev came around, the Russians were already ebbing in terms of belief in their system. In the 80s, the Russians experienced a wave of damaging occurrences. The first was the 1980 Olympics. Many ordinary Russians came into contact with athletes from outside the communist bloc for the first time. They discovered that the Western athletes were fantastically wealthy compared to the highest members of the Communist Party. They also discovered that the Western nations had access to training equipment and other sports gear that they could only dream of. This dramatically increased doubts in the system. The entirety of the 80s saw the most depressed prices for oil that the world had seen in a long time, and this was devastating to the Soviet economy. The Soviets were absolutely dependent on many countries for critical parts of their economy. The only way they could buy this stuff was with oil money. Cheap oil crippled the Soviet economy. The next item was the war in Afghanistan. The CIA successfully firing up massive opposition in Afghanistan and arming them with top of the line weapons hit the Soviet economy when it was already beginning to reel from the shock to oil prices. The ramp up of Reagan's defense spending forced the Soviets to try to increase defense spending as well. This compounded with the other issues previously mentioned. Then finally, there was Chernobyl. The cost of cleaning up and fixing the damage was astronomical. There was one last hope percolating around the establishment of the Soviet Union. They believed that militarily they were still a peer of the United States. The Gulf War ended that fantasy. They expected Soviet equipment in the hands of the Iraqis would maul the American military. The actual results caused a complete loss of faith in the establishment of Russia. So, over the course of time, the people lost faith in the system. Over the 1980s, the establishment lost faith in the system as well. Gorbachev's reforms were the equivalent of showing up with a single bucket of water for a forest fire that was raging across several states. My second issue with the article in terms of reform is what Trump can do to America. First, I still very much doubt that there's anything remotely akin to a Trump doctrine. I don't think his thought process and plans are as well developed as even the sketch idea in this article. Assuming he does have a coherent plan, so the plan to work is going to require 100,000 ideologically driven people to replace key bureaucrats in order to cause a change. Or alternately, he's going to need a level of information on key government players in the bureaucracy that could only be provided to him by the FBI or the CIA. I don't see that happening. Unlike the Soviet Union, the US establishment still believes in itself and is relatively stable. Let's say Trump has this big plan. The bureaucracy currently is overwhelmingly pro establishment and anti Trump. Critical portions of the military officer corps are dominated by Democratic accessions. Changing upper echelons is a 30-year process. In the last 30 years, we've had 16 years of Clinton, Obama, and Biden in control of political promotions. And then we've had 8 years of Bush pushing a neocon agenda. And in that entire 30 years, 4 years of Trump, whom, by what we have heard, was completely ineffective. The rest of the security state, the FBI, CIA, NSA, etc., is staffed in all the critical nodes with neoliberals, progressives, and neocons. Then you have the Federal Reserve. What's Trump's monetary policy and how does he convince the Fed to implement it? Then there's the legacy media complex. The only way that group loses power is by older voters dying. As long as TV watching voters exist, legacy media wields power and there's nothing anyone can do about it. Ultimately, the American establishment is displaying weakness, either intentionally or unintentionally, with this frothing hysterical fear of Trump's capabilities. Why? That's something we'll discuss in another video. So, in the comments below, do you believe that Trump has some form of reform plan? And do you believe what Morgoth is suggesting, that the US might be as fragile as the late 1980s Soviet Union? Please consider smashing the like button. If the YouTube algorithm brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, check out my other titles. I do lots of different things. Surely you'd find something interesting. Please consider subscribing. And if you know somebody who finds this video interesting, please share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.